If the Old Testament is composed of 39 books, written across hundreds of years from a diversity of authors, how do we know that these are the books that God intended? Would Jesus even recognize the Old Testament we hold in our hands?
The books that were being discussed as possibly a part of the Old Testament canon by the time we get to the first century are books like Lamentations, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, works like that, and maybe a few other works that end up showing up in what we call the Apocrypha, Wisdom, Sirach, those kinds of works. But the works that everyone recognizes were seen as inspired and a part of the Jewish scripture at the time include the Torah, the first 5 books, Proverbs, Psalms, your major prophets, most of your minor prophets. And so if we don't know the exact limits of the Old Testament canon in the first century, which is possible, it may be that it was already decided by then, that's also conceivable, that which is being excluded doesn't really represent any significant portion of the text that the New Testament's interacting with.
We all know now that if we have Catholic friends, their Bibles will generally be a bit bigger than ours because they contain a number of books in the Old Testament. Book of Maccabees, for example, that Protestant books exclude. And they're excluded by and large on the grounds that we don't find them in the Hebrew. They don't seem to have the kind of long-standing universal acceptance within the church prior to, say, the Council of Trent, that one expects from canonical books.
You liar!
One of the primary reasons we don't use those books or don't view those books as Scripture is because Jesus and the apostles did not use those books or view those books as Scripture. It's a very basic way of putting it. If those books indeed were viewed as Scripture and that people were using them widely as Scripture and they were considered part of the Old Testament canon, we would have expected Jesus and the apostles somewhere, sometime, at least once, using one of those books as Scripture. And the fact is we don't see that even a single time.
Liar, liar, your pants on fire. Liar, liar.
Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth, Pinocchio.
This is really interesting. Check this out. I have here the Geneva Bible. This is the 1560 edition of the Geneva Bible. This is what the Pilgrims used. And the Bible of the Protestant Reformation. And this is interesting. This is in the book of Matthew, chapter 23. And it says in verse 37, Jesus is talking. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent to thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, as the hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your habitation shall be left unto you desolate. Now notice how there's a marginal note right here. And when you look it up in the margin, it references the book of 2nd Esdras. Now, it references 2nd Esdras chapter 1, verse 30, which, believe it or not, is actually one of the apocryphal books. And keep in mind, the apocryphal books are in the Greek Septuagint. Now, in the Geneva Bible, which the Pilgrims used, their table of contents included that apocryphal section. The whole Bible included that apocryphal section. And so did the King James Bible, by the way. And the book of 2nd Esdras is one of those apocryphal books. And if you were to look it up, just for the sake of reading, I have here this is the King James Apocryphal, authorized King James version of the Apocrypha. And I'm just going to open it up in here just because it's easier to read. But if you look this up, the second book of Esdras, here we go, look at that. Verse 30. I gathered you together as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings. I gathered you together as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings. But now what shall I do unto you? I will cast you out from my face. Now, down here in verse 33, look at what it says. Thus says the Almighty Lord, your house is desolate. I will cast you out as the wind doth stubble. Which is the exact thing that Jesus had said in Matthew 23. Matthew 23:37. The very next thing Jesus said right down here in verse 38. Behold, your habitation shall be left unto you desolate. It appears to me that Jesus is quoting directly from 2nd Esdras. Well, here's what's interesting. Not only does it appear that Jesus is quoting from 2nd Esdras, but here's where it gets really good. In Esdras 7, chapter 28, God sends an angel to Ezra. By the way, Esdras is the same as Ezra. They both mean the same thing. Well, we've got this angel speaking to Ezra. Notice how he says in verse 3, he says, and I said, speak on, my God. So God is speaking to Ezra through this angel. This gets really interesting. So God is speaking to Ezra. He says, behold, the time shall come that these tokens which I have told thee shall come to pass, and the bride shall appear, and she coming forth shall be seen, that now is withdrawn from the earth. And whosoever is delivered from the foresaid evils shall see my wonders. Now this is interesting. This is God speaking to Ezra. And Ezra lived about 400 years before Jesus. Okay, he lived during the Persian Empire about 400 years before Christ. Look at what he says here. This is God speaking to Ezra. Verse 28. For my son, Jesus, shall be revealed. This is God speaking to Ezra 400 years before Jesus was born. And God says to Ezra, for my son Jesus shall be revealed with those that be with him. And they that remain shall rejoice within 400 years. After these years shall my son Christ die, and all men that have life. So God is speaking to Ezra, and he says that his son is named Jesus. And he says in 400 years, which Ezra lived 400 years before Christ, he says, after these years, my son, Christ, will die. So the book of 2nd Esdras is making it crystal clear that God has a son. His name is Jesus, and he's the Christ. And 400 years after Ezra, he's going to die. That's probably the clearest messianic prophecy that I've ever seen. And this Geneva Bible, which the Pilgrims used ever since 1560, the Pilgrims brought it to America in 1620, and their Bible in Matthew 23:37 has Jesus quoting the book of 2nd Esdras. You know, people say Jesus never quoted the apocryphal books. Yeah, he did. He quoted directly from it. And that very same book of 2nd Esdras clearly speaks of Jesus. God speaking that Jesus is the Christ. That's pretty amazing. It's in the King James Apocrypha.
The Holy Bible, 1611 edition, King James Version. The Book of 2nd Esdras, Chapter 5. Nevertheless, as concerning the tokens, behold, the days shall come that they which dwell upon the earth shall be taken in a great number, and the way of truth shall be hidden, and the land shall be barren of faith. But iniquity shall be increased above that which now thou seest, or that thou hast heard long ago. And the land that thou seest now to have roots, shalt thou see wasted suddenly.
You know, somehow, I told you so just doesn't quite say it.